Well, good morning, everybody. Morning. Morning. Look, thank you for joining us. This is it. We've reached the final frontier, the last presentation, the last session of Groceryshop 2022. We really hope that you have had a fantastic time. What's more important is we really hope that you tell us about it. So good, bad, what's worked and what's different. Your feedback is absolutely crucial to us. So you'll all receive a request for feedback at the end of the show. Please let us know because it's really important. We really value everything that you do, and we really value that you've taken the time to spend this session with us today. It's the last of, and I'm sure you might have already heard the stats, 15 keynotes, 53 track sessions, 200 plus speakers, and over 40 hours of content. Now, with that much, we know that it's impossible for anyone to get around it, but really fortunate between myself. I'm really pleased to welcome on Krystina, who I'm sure you've seen many times already during the thing. Krystina Gustafson, who's our SVP of Content at Shop Talk and Groceryshop, and Joe Laszlo, who is our VP of Content at Groceryshop and Shop Talk. Between us, we have tried to get to as many of the sessions as possible, and those that we haven't, our teams and the other guys within the content team have shared us their thoughts. So what we're going to try and do over probably the next 45 minutes is talk through and have some conversations about the big picture. So from all this content, what are the big themes that we've heard? What did we expect coming into the show? What's been different? What's challenged? What's surprised? And then at the end, we'd really like to open it up and we'll take any questions that you have. So we hope that at the end of this session, you'll leave with a view of anything you might have missed, or certainly what our view of the content at Groceryshop this year has been. So I think, Krystina, if I could turn to you first. Obviously, yesterday you shared the zeitgeist, the grocery zeitgeist. Hopefully many people got to see it. If they didn't, can you just remind us what the key themes were? What did you expect coming into the show?
Yeah, happy to kick off there, and thank you everyone, just echoing Ben, so happy to have spent the last couple of days with you guys. I think from our perspective, similar to what Ben said the purpose of this session is, that's also kind of what we tried to achieve with the zeitgeist. It's incredibly hard to boil down the industry into 20 minutes, but we do our best, and I think from our perspective, there's just so much content coming at you guys across these 3 days. If you kind of had to have these 3 bullet points that you could go back to your executive team and say, these are the things that we need to be focusing on, as we sort of enter the next phase for our business. These are them, and so the 3 themes that we landed on were convenience, engagement, and profitability. I think, convenience obviously has taken on a new definition just coming out of the pandemic. It means so much more than just a channel. I think it was the gentleman from GoPuff who spoke who said convenience isn't a channel anymore, it's a mindset, and I think that really kind of sums up our thesis on convenience as well. Engagement, just kind of thinking beyond the transactional in grocery e-commerce. Obviously, that's still going to be incredibly important going forward, but how do we kind of take this to the next level with consumers online? And then profitability, we heard the drum beat across probably every session, so that one was an obvious one to include.
Fantastic. So that was our view coming in, and we've heard a lot about it during the course. I think as we as a team have reflected, we've pulled out what I think are big 5 from the conversations. And what I'd like to do is just introduce the big 5, and then we're going to spend 5-10 minutes of each sharing the perspectives and really why we think that these were the 5 most important ones. So we're going to kick off with inflation. You absolutely cannot avoid that, but we've got to get a balance between the short term and the long term. So I'll have a conversation about that. Krystina's just mentioned redefining convenience. We expected that to be a big trend, and wow, it's been a big trend. And there's been some fantastic insights shared around that one. We want to talk about evolving brand and retailer relationships. Some of you might have been in the track session on CPG retailer relationships just this morning, where we had a great conversation about that. The world is dramatically changing, and within that, it's been unavoidable to bump into retail media networks the whole way. So we're going to have a talk about that. We're going to talk about engaging shoppers and what we've learned, and we're going to talk about the tech trends. So what tech trends have we heard? Joe led the startup pitch. What have we seen walking the floor? And then again, at the end, we'd really love to hear your questions and your perspectives as well. So I think those are our big 5 coming out the show. I think where we really wanted to start was let's talk about inflation. Not let's get it out the way, but I think it's really important that we have that shorter term perspective. I think, Krystina, you had some perspectives in your opening comments and in the zeitgeist, but right back to the start of the show when you opened the main stage about the balance between inflation in short term and long term.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting, and I'll kind of pivot to talk about some conversations I've actually had off stage, because sometimes those are even more telling. I think some of the reactions that I got after presenting the zeitgeist were kind of like, thank you, because we're facing exactly this situation right now where our board is questioning every dollar that we're spending, right? And it's very easy for us to sit up here and say, hey, you should invest in this. Hey, look into live streaming. Hey, look into the metaverse, do X, Y, Z, because it's not our money that's going toward these projects. And I think, you definitely need to keep an open mind to all those new technologies and explore what they might mean for your business long term. But at the end of the day, there is inflation out there. It's harder to get consumers to spend money with you, especially incremental dollars. We heard Fiji, Simo talking about, the overall basket value is not going down, but people are putting fewer items into it, right? So you're kind of hitting this net neutral. And so if your consumer isn't fueling, that incremental spend, then that means you have to find those cost savings in your business. So I think thinking about inflation within that viewpoint was an interesting perspective that I wasn't thinking about coming into the show.
Yep. And Joe, around responses. So I think, when we've been talking, there's almost two buckets of responses. There's how the customer's changing, how retailers and brands are responding to try and give more value, and then how retailers and brands are trying to respond to save money, to make it more efficient, so they can still maximize the volume. What are some of the tactics or activities or programs that you've heard about on any of those buckets?
Yeah, I think it's really, there we go. It's been really interesting, kind of the gamut of responses we've heard here over the last several days, kind of running from, it's just kind of exogenous, it's like the weather, we kind of take it into account, but we can't really do much about it. I think, definitely, from the retailer's side, I think there's a view of this inflationary kind of challenging economy as an opportunity for private brands and to launch kind of new value-focused private brands, kind of further complicating brand-retailer relationships. But definitely, as consumers are looking to save money, kind of emphasizing that there are these kind of value options that are still high quality, available for families is important. I think from the brand's perspective, I think it's certainly about focusing on operational efficiency and trying to kind of squeeze every last kind of penny of unnecessary cost out of our still convoluted, not always reliable supply chains, distribution networks, and really kind of being thoughtful about promotions as well is one more tactic too, as far as again, kind of trying to emphasize to consumers that prices are going up, but there are still opportunities to save.
Okay. And I think just building on what you were saying, Instacart, think about what the responses, Fiji went through, how are they responding? How are they trying to deliver more value to customers? They talked about it making it easier to find promotions. There are fewer promotions out there. I think during the analyst session, this was described as the most rational environment that the analysts have seen for 20 years in terms of promotions. So there are fewer promotions for all the reasons we know, but make those that are on the platforms or in store easier to find. She talked about dialing up loyalty. So loyalty cards, and I think I want to talk about loyalty benefits a little bit as well. And the third one she talked about was giving new delivery options that give value, which I think means slower and cheaper, which is great. So giving that range of spectrum for customers. So what have you heard on loyalty, Krystina?
Actually, sorry, not to divert from that question. What you just said actually reminded me of something that Tim Simmons said on the session that he did, the track keynote, and he was basically talking about, there was some data that we presented that curbside pickup growth has been slowing quite substantially, and I think his point was consumers are still actually choosing that option because it's cheaper than delivery, and so I actually think there's kind of an opportunity for retailers there to kind of promote those cost savings to consumers and actually drive a behavior that's going to be mutually beneficial to them as well. But yeah, I mean, I think on the loyalty front, that's kind of like a perennial topic. And I know we actually have a session going on right now about loyalty, but I think it's just kind of about how you can bring consumers into that ecosystem in a way that's going to provide them value, but also maybe sort of build some brand affinity. And I think Art Sebastian from Casey's talked about this pretty well. It's, there's the typical loyalty programs and typical approaches, but what's really been brand right for them is you can also sort of donate to local organizations within the community. And it's something that's incredibly important to Casey's. And so I think from my perspective, I think something that's interesting is thinking about loyalty beyond just sort of that traditional, well, here's your $5 off coupon, and really kind of building that extra layer of affection for the brand is something that stood out to me on the loyalty front.
Yeah, I mean, there's just such a breadth of different tactical approaches to loyalty right now, and I guess it's sort of one universe if we're talking about the retailers, where I think Fiji, among other people, Fiji Simo from Instacart, among other people, kind of made the point that we still are kind of loyal to our local grocery store in a way that other categories within retail maybe don't enjoy. But from a brand perspective, from a CPG perspective, I think a lot of things that we've taken for granted around loyalty are being shaken up right now. But there are plenty of new digital tactics to enforce or encourage loyalty too. General Mills was talking yesterday where kind of within that one company, they have both kind of a traditional sounding box tops program that now has a digital component, but they've also just launched some new loyalty initiatives working with a technology solution partner as opposed to trying to do it all in-house. So there are lots of different routes to staying in touch with your customers, making sure they remember your brand and that you're on the list the next time they go to the store.
And I definitely have picked up on something that for me is one to watch, which is loyalty programs that basically just give cash back, to make it really simple to help people save money. So whether it's Upside doing it, growing out the gasoline in the US, as the Walmart sole subsidiary in the UK, having just relaunched its loyalty program, giving away cash rather than points. So I think there's a trend of how you can use those loyalty mechanics to give people money and just to really help in an inflationary environment. Moving on a little bit, linked to inflation obviously is labor inflation. That's one of the other big economic headwinds that people are facing into at the moment. The rapid fire technology session back on day one with Chris Walton, there were some really interesting conversations about how the business case for some technologies is changing, that with labor prices in store and labor costs in store going up, technologies that previously were too expensive are now becoming the business case works. So electronic shelf-edge ticketing was an example. Too expensive previously, works now from a saving labor cost in store perspective. And then you can start to unlock some of the other benefits that electronic shelf-edge ticketing can bring around price sensitivity, etc. I'm wondering what you guys heard about that one, about technologies that are helping retailers save money.
Yeah, I think I would actually, my takeaway from that is so often we sort of hear, oh, that technology isn't going to work. And it's sort of, pushed to the sidelines and we stop talking about it. And it seems like this is one of those examples that people maybe had written off as a capability that was ever going to mean anything. And so for me, actually, the takeaway from that is just like you can't, even if you dismiss something because it isn't right for your business today, that doesn't mean, 5-10 years down the road, it isn't going to be applicable. So I think, that would probably be my takeaway there. I think obviously though, as it pertains to other technologies that can kind of help, automation is the key one. I was actually just sitting in the session with Chris Foltz from Heinen's, and he was just kind of making a joke about all the things that can't be automated yet. And obviously we're all in the business and the people business. We want to make sure that we're still, okay.
Okay, you're good.
Okay. Am I good?
You were good. Try again.
Okay, let's
go to handheld.
Let's go to handheld for me.
It's on.
It's on. Okay, great. Ooh, hello. So I think that the opportunity to automate the parts of the business that can be automated, whether it's sort of tagging your products so that they're showing up on the website with relevant recommendations, whether it's micro fulfillment centers and just kind of like using robotics. Tim Simmons again from Sam's Club was talking about the successes that they've seen in using the floor scrubbing robots that also check for inventory. And so I think it's just we hear it so much, it's probably a little bit of a cliche, but automating the things that you don't need the human touch for and then freeing up that labor to continue to provide the amazing customer service that the industry is known for.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure that I heard any brand new labor saving technologies, right? I mean, electronic shelf tags have been around for a while, kind of in-store robots have been around for a while, and yet I think kind of to Krystina's point, there's sort of new variations on these, or kind of the world around us is changing and kind of making new economic arguments for some of these solutions. We'll be talking about tech later, but I want to name drop Vici Robotics, who won Startup Pitch, so early stage tech company making an in-store robot that actually has an arm, which like usually the in-store robots are kind of like, Marty at Giant or the shelf scanning robots, but like when the store is closed, like Vici's robot actually in theory will be able to restock shelves for stores. So I think that's super interesting. Zippity on the technology track does that shelf scanning thing, but with a kind of additional sort of metaverse-y kind of new layer of data that I haven't heard from the other vendors in that space yet. They can do it, but I think the way that they're telling the story is a little different and maybe will resonate with the times.
And congratulations for getting metaverse into a conversation on inflation. That's strong word, Joe. We will come back to that one.
I feel like I didn't mean to say that word. I think we all agreed that the M word was going to be banned from this conversation, so I apologize.
Inflation, that's the backdrop, and I think everybody day-to-day in their day-to-day jobs understands that. But what we want to spend the rest of the time on is talking about the future. This is about creating the future of grocery, and there is some significant and fundamental, and I've heard them described as wanting a generational changes happening to customer behavior at the moment. And a lot of that is around this idea of redefining convenience. So Krystina, you already mentioned it's a mindset, not a channel. Can we just expand? What do you mean by that?
Right. Well, I think, historically we've, if you go back to just kind of like the early iterations of how that word has been used in our industry, and quite frankly, even when we were developing a convenience track for the very first time at this show, a lot of the feedback we got is, well, is this only relevant to convenience store chains? And it's like, no, that's exactly the opposite of the argument that we're trying to make here. I think, in the Zeitgeist, I presented a framework that just kind of talked about all the different ways you can think about convenience across the path to purchase. It can be something like being able to easily add something to your cart when you're shopping online. It can be, similar to your point about in stores, how do you use those electronic shelf labels so that the pickers can find products easily. There's so many different ways to think about convenience beyond, just that individual format. I think too, one of the other key points that we've heard a lot through the show is that convenience oftentimes is associated with speed, and there's been so much conversation going into this event about sort of that fast, ultra fast, quick commerce delivery model, 15, 30 minutes. Sometimes that does mean convenience, sometimes it doesn't. And I think we've heard from a couple of speakers, I believe it was Matt from Spartan Nash yesterday, who sort of made the point that, it makes sense to have a 15-minute or 30-minute option if it's tucked into a broader swath of offerings, right? Where then it turns into sort of incremental spend versus having an entire business model that's predicated on that being the definition to convenience for every single consumer.
Okay. Gosh, you've started to introduce some really big concepts there. And I think there's a kind of fundamental to our thinking. Some quotes that I'd written down, and then Joe, I'll throw some of these in your direction. Alberton said we start with the customer, not the channel. We want to make everything easy. We had just a conversation earlier today from Kroger. We don't care what route our customers take to shop us. We just want to find them in our ecosystem. And a great quote from day one, which is about we just want every customer touch point now to be shoppable, no matter where they are, what they're doing, what mission they're on. Joe, this is incredibly different to convenience as a 7-Eleven C-store on your local corner, isn't it?
I think so. It creates amazing new opportunities for the 7-Elevens of the world as much as any other player within the grocery space. But yeah, I think it's been interesting to hear how companies are talking about omni-channel, omni-platform. Zach from Rayleigh's yesterday used the phrase unified commerce, which it's still an awkward phrase, but I like it better because it sort of gets us away from I think the way a lot of companies thought about omni-channel 5 years ago is you could have this channel over here, this channel over here, and that channel over there, and never the twain shall meet necessarily. And the world we live in today is those blur together so much. And also it's not just stores over here and marketplaces over here and your own e-com over there. You also have social shopping, which we heard a great session on yesterday. And so there's a host of, and all of the different partners, right? The intermediaries like Instacart that also kind of are channels for you to reach your customers. So finding ways to integrate all of those, be wherever your customer wants you to be when they have that moment when they need a product, want to learn more about a product, I think is a challenge, but also a huge opportunity.
Yeah, if I might add to that, I was actually just in a session, and I'm going to forget who said it, but they were talking also about just sort of the importance of convenience when it comes to meals and products as well. I think we focus so much on technology here because it's kind of in our DNA, but I think we can't forget about the fact that consumers these days, I'm just thinking of my own behaviors, if I can walk into a store and there's a section up at front that has, ready to heat options. I think for a while the industry was so focused on meal kits, and I think we've sort of evolved over the years. The prepared food space, and just kind of hearing from the CEO of Kitchen United about the fact that the sort of prepared foods business is probably, and I know he's biased, but one of the lowest hanging fruit opportunities for our industry. I 100% agree with that, because the easier you can make it for me to stop and grab something that I can make for dinner that night and not actually have to cook it myself, like that is a massive opportunity. And it's also going to have a lot of implications for, not only how you do business, the products you source, your labor in stores, but also how you're going to design your store format, right? Because you want those options to be right up at the front entrance.
Brilliant. Fantastic point. Joe, I've got to go back. Your game is strong today. Not only were you first with Metaverse, you also went first with Omnichannel.
Yep. I'm trying to get every box on that buzzword bingo.
We took bets earlier.
It's almost as an industry, we've been, ever since the word Omnichannel was invented, everyone has been talking about how much they hate it. But at this conference, people seem to have been discussing Omnichannel as in, actually, it's no longer a concept, it's reality. And a part of that is the full integration with physical stores. Is it fair to say physical stores are back, or really genuinely did they actually never go anywhere?
Yeah, I think in grocery in particular, just in case. With grocery in particular, physical stores never went anywhere. I mean, in the United States for sure, and I think everywhere, like they were the only store for a while, and yet I think the way shoppers have thought about the store has changed a bit. I think kind of pre 2019 or so, there was so much focus on like putting a wine bar in the supermarket and kind of other fun stuff, and we pulled way back from that, understandably. But now that those sorts of concepts are back, and going back several days to my conversation with Jason, the new CEO of Whole Foods, talking about your retail theater being a part of like the grocery shopping experience, which like grocery shopping can be fun, but like that, outside of maybe Stu Leonard's in the Northeast and one or two other places, I don't think of grocery as theatrical necessarily, but I think it's exciting to think about that. It's the opposite of convenience in some ways. We can get to engagement in a little while, but the idea that a store has to serve both of those purposes, right? It has to be fun for the person who really likes the leisurely shop. It has to be very easy to get in and out for the person who just wants to do that.
I mean, there is no doubt that the customer and their expectation is changing, right? This idea of making every moment shoppable, and that's exciting. This is a significant change that's creating a load of opportunities. But I think a lot of the conversation that I've heard is that to realize those opportunities, CPGs and retailers have got to work together on their data. And the idea that you provide every moment to be shoppable in a seamless way, as Walmart talked about yesterday morning, requires a level of data and a level of capability that certainly this morning, Steve from Bain was challenging that no one has yet. What have you been hearing about data, how it's evolving, and how retailers and brands can genuinely work together to unlock some of these seamless opportunities?
Yeah, it's a great question, in the sense that it's a challenging question to summarize the sheer scope of different perspectives we've heard over the last couple of days. Yeah. I think, everything from, that kumbaya, we love our retailer/brand partners and we're doing everything we can to them, all the way through to that wall is back. The wall that came down for a couple of years as we all had to struggle through things together. We now are kind of suddenly not feeling so lovey anymore, and I think there are tons of new exciting things. I mean, retail media networks kind of create a whole new opportunity for both the retailer side and the brand side to potentially leverage data to reach customers. I mean, the one thing that nobody questions is data is fundamental. Like we are all data businesses now, and I think one more thing, and then I'll let you and Krystina kind of share your ideas. I do think where there's been significant progress the last couple of years is nobody nobody feels like they're just starting their data journeys. Everybody agrees it's a journey, it's a marathon, it's, you know, many innings or whatever you have in cricket. But everybody is along the way on that journey. Nobody's still stuck at the starting gates. Nobody's unsure what the route looks like. Everybody sort of has their game plan in place, and it's very exciting and reassuring to me that like people feel like they know where their trajectory is as far as unlocking that value.
Yeah, I actually think one of the most insightful things that I heard about data just happened a couple sessions ago, and it was Tiffany Hicks from Bumblebee talking about there's sort of this pressure for the brands, you know, to purchase the data from their retail partners, but oftentimes the retail partners aren't themselves looking at it. They're not having collaborative conversations based off of it. And so at the end of the day, when you're taking that approach, I think she used the term like you're just sort of like strong arming or you know, essentially forcing someone into buying data to be a good partner, but you're not leveraging it. At the end of the day, that's kind of a waste of everyone's time. So I think there are opportunities, as Joe mentioned, the data exists. I think there's a desire from the brands, especially to work with the retailers on this. And I think, to your point, there has been some progress, but it kind of depends who you're talking to, how much progress there has been made. I would say on data and some other things, you know, we're hearing about finding coming back in the retailer and brand relationships as well, if products aren't on shelves. So I think that's one other thing. You know, the other thing that I would call out that I thought was particularly interesting was from my conversation with Shai Eisenman, who's the CEO of Bubble yesterday. And, you know, they started off direct to consumer, but she knew very early on that they wanted to go into mass retail. And it's a little surprising because it's a beauty brand, right? Like yes, they're mass, they have a lower price point, but beauty typically has the margins to be able to support a direct to consumer business in the way that probably a lot of other folks in the audience's businesses don't, quite frankly. But she was just sort of talking about the fact that, you know, for her, the partnership with Walmart and just getting that scale is worth more than any data that she could get first party. And she was like, yeah, sure, data is great, but if I already have the sale, do I really need the data? And I realize that's oversimplifying a lot of things. I'm not saying that's the golden ticket, but it was just kind of interesting to hear that other perspective that sometimes, especially for some emerging brands, just getting that scale can be more important. And I think you made the point yesterday that some brands these days just underestimate how much data they already have from other channels, even if it isn't direct to consumer. Was it Sabrina McPherson who was talking about that? Yeah,
there was a data workshop yesterday morning, and I think Sabrina from Publicis Sapient had some really, really smart things to say about, you know, kind of that data journey, and that was kind of one of her fundamental points is you know, kind of don't worry about whether you have data. You do. You just maybe haven't collected it, put in the right infrastructure to kind of start putting it in the same place, but yeah, I think, you know, everybody in this industry has a lot of data. It's what do you do with it? How do you turn it into actionable insights? It's the challenge.
Yeah. And I heard the point made, you know, very succinctly this morning that the core skills required to run a large retailer have changed and are rapidly changing from purely tangible and physical to increasingly intangible and data. So you've got to know how to run a data business, and you've got to know how to run a insight sales business and increasing an ecosystem, as well as running boxes and moving things around the country. It's fascinating. I'm just going to bring this little bit together with a great quote. Hopefully some of you were able to join the track keynote yesterday from Yale Cosset from Kroger. A 20-minute tour de force. There was kind of 2 hours of content that he packed in. But there was an incredible quote, and he said, the biggest disruption over the last 10 years is that everything is currently being disrupted at once, not just one big thing. And it's no longer okay for a retailer to be good at just one thing. They've got to try and bring everything together as seamless as possible. And you can only do that if you root everything in technology and data. Now there speaks Chief Technology Officer, but I think that's a fantastic point. Because that leads us on to profitability. We've had a lot of conversations about profitability. There's been a lot of data points shared on online profitability across the whole conference. And we tried to bring together a summary because those data points are actually being quite different. But I think when we look at online profitability, there's really 2 ways to think about it. There is first, how is the order picked? So most profitable is automated, least profitable is where it actually has to pick it from store. And then the second chunk is, how does it get to the customer? Most profitable, customer comes to get it from you, curbside, and least profitable, the grocer has to take it to home. Hopefully it's quite intuitive. When you unpack the numbers, you can see why there is a journey, a direction of travel to try and migrate as much as possible into the most profitable. But at the same time, it's realization that we can't push anymore. Thank you. That we can't push anymore. That actually, if we want to be seamless and we want to encourage our customers to be able to shop wherever, we're going to have to make this whole mix profitable. And one thing I've kept hearing, and I'd love to hear what your perspective on this are, is that the only way to do it is to make a mix rather than just go for any one particular route. Krystina, I'm going to hand back.
Sure, I would agree with that thesis. It was interesting even just kind of seeing the data that Tomorrow Retail Consulting provided us for the zeitgeist about how this looks a little bit different when you're looking at Europe, where they've achieved density and scale, right?
Yep.
And so the bottom 2 points that you have on the pickup and delivery side would actually flip, right? And so I think that's kind of interesting as you think about grocery e-commerce in the U.S. achieving that scale. I mean, I realize our country is much larger, but certain markets, that equation will probably flip if it hasn't already for certain retailers. I think you mentioned Zach Wilson from Raley's earlier. I think he might have been the person to speak about this yesterday as well, but just kind of thinking that there's so much, I would say, generalization in the industry out there, right? For years we talked about our MFC's right, our CFC's right, you know, and it was sort of like phrased in a one size fits all. And so I think, you know, there's differences, of course, in the size of your business, the maturity of your business, the scale of your own business, but it's also a market by market opportunity. And so what might be right for you in New York City isn't going to be right for you in Iowa. And so I think so much of the conversation these days goes to, well, you need to get off Instacart. And look, I understand why some folks in the industry are critical of that platform, but at the end of the day, they have the scale, right? And right. Partnering with these marketplaces, like, it helps you, and some of these chains that, you know, maybe have 75 stores in one region, just they simply can't do it on their own. So I don't mean to like start a huge debate on that. I know we could talk about that for hours, but you know, I think the point that I'm trying to make here is just it kind of needs to be a decision that's made on a company by company basis, and even whatever your decision is, it's not going to apply to your entire business if you have a national footprint.
Yeah, 100% agree.
Which I think. Look, there was a lovely quote from Matt at Spartan Nash in a conversation yesterday, which was, he was posed a question about how he manages first-party delivery, third-party capabilities, relationships with DoorDash, relationships with Uber Eats, relationships with Instacart. And he said, how do you manage that? And his response was, well, right now, if I was a Facebook page, my relationship status would be, it's complicated. And I thought that was a great line, and that kind of sums up the reality of managing ecosystems, managing some of the relationships behind that, and that will then impact the retail and the brand relationships, because there is no doubt, and you won't have failed to have picked up at any point during the last 3 days, that one of the ways that retailers are trying to unlock value and unlock profitability is through retail and media networks. And that's part of the link of that total pie. So come on then, Joe, retail media networks, is that our silver bullet?
It's complicated. I think, again, there's such a diverse set of perspectives expressed over the last several days about retail media networks and their value. You know, I was at one of our brand and retailer dinners a couple of nights ago, and talking to a woman from a kind of well-established but smaller brand who referred to retail media networks as kind of just a new tax from her perspective. She's got campaigns she wants to do with her retailer partners, and the retailer partners are like, yeah, we'll do that, but you gotta buy some of this too. And it was, I don't know if that's common, if a lot of brands feel that way, or if that's just been her experience, but she kind of felt like she needed to do it. She didn't get a lot of value out of it, but to get the things that she did think she needed, or she did need, she just kind of needed to do it. But you kind of swing all the way over to like others who just see like huge bottom of the funnel advantages from kind of shifting some of their media dollars towards whether it's Target, Walmart, Kroger, or any of the smaller guys.
Yeah, and that's, look, so to share some numbers on it, this is some data that our friends at Insider Intelligence shared with us, and this is looking at spend on digital marketing channels. The black is search, the red is promotion, the grey is promotion, but the red is for retail media networks. So you can see over time, they're predicting that by 2024, so only 2 years' time, that there'll be as much money spent for retail media networks, with Amazon taking the lion's share, than is being spent on search right now. Which, if you think about the brands in the room, you think about where your mix is at the moment, we're quite away from that. So, I mean, is this incremental? Do we think that there'll be proven ROI to be able to fuel that model, or are we just talking about rearranging deck chairs, Krystina?
It's a really good question. I think to your point about sort of, it kind of circles back to what we were talking about earlier, right? In order to make this a viable investment for brands, they need to see the data. They need to see that it's working. And then I think you can get to incremental spend if you're doing that. But if you're just sort of, taking this money from one pocket to the other because you're not seeing what the results are, then I think there's only a certain amount of money that's out there in the market, especially as we've been talking about earlier in this particular economic environment. So I think my perspective is, and I think, just based off of what we've been hearing over the past couple of days, until you can kind of prove that, it's not really going to drive incrementality.
Yeah, and then flipping to the other side, I think one thing that we've heard a couple of times over the course of the last several days and before is, some retailers kind of talking about, well, yeah, our e-com business is never going to be profitable, but we can make it up on the money that we're going to pour in from our retail media networks. And I kind of think that assumption that they're a panacea or just a way to print money and you can kind of lose money, a whole bunch of money over there because you'll make it up some unspecified other way. I mean, I'm old enough that I remember the .com bubble, and that's not a new story, but it didn't work the last time, and I'm not sure. It may work for some this time, but I wouldn't bet the farm on it.
Yeah, but in a world where Kroger makes end of the day 2 cents on the dollar, and Amazon media services is making 25 cents on the dollar, it's inevitable that is going to have to be part of the growing mix. I think, skeptical or not, and what the long-term incrementality, I think our take would be retail media networks are not going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, just looking back at this chart, though, it's in each of those digital media categories, there's one giant player, and everybody else chases after kind of a relatively small slice of the pie. And to the point about are your retail media network partners good partners or not good partners if you're a CPG company? There's going to be a lot of competition out there. I think the market will quickly push everybody to be as good a partner as they can be.
Absolutely.
And I think it'll also depend on sort of who your customer is and what capabilities you're able to stand up, how quickly. I'm thinking back to your point about physical stores and how do we start leveraging retail media in the physical store as well. So I think the companies, which will inevitably be the larger ones, sorts of capabilities to market quicker are going to be the ones that get, the larger share of the pie.
I had the opportunity on Saturday before, as we were setting up for the event, to go and visit some stores in the Vegas area. And I visited a major retailer owned by a parent company who's got a lot of capability in the digital marketing game. And the big screen in the store was trying to get me to buy a $30,000 truck from the auto place down the road. So I think that there is real...
You could drive that back to London, though, right?
I will not be taking that back to London. But there's real low-hanging fruit in this space. That is absolutely for sure. And it's opportunity, and it's a chance for some incrementality. Okay, let's keep moving on. So I wasn't terribly engaged by the truck advert when I was trying to buy my lunch, but we have heard a lot about how we engage in shoppers. There was a lovely quote at the start of the week was, e-commerce fixed buying but broke shopping. Yeah. I think that's fascinating because what we're hearing now is how do we get people shopping again and really shopping. And one of the big pieces of that pie, one of the hot topics has been live stream. Krystina, what have you heard about live streaming?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there's still a lot of skepticism out there about sort of the viability for live stream, I would say overall in the US, but especially in the grocery category. I think the perspective that I have just based off of, conversations that we've been hearing on stage as well as, kind of conversations having off stage is there's a huge opportunity for video-enabled commerce. Does it necessarily have to be live? Probably not. Does it have to live on, TikTok where people have the attention span of an ant? Probably not. It might be better served on your retail website where people can access that content at all times. So I think definitely opportunities for video commerce, but I think it's a little to be determined what that's going to look like in the live stream space specifically.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think, again, it came up several times. I sat in on our Gen Z session, which featured TikTok. And again, I think there are amazing ways that brands can leverage TikTok. It's just that long form kind of, let's spend 5 minutes looking at this bag is probably not the best way to use that medium, but great ways to use that medium to engage. But the other speaker on that session was the founder and CEO of a company called Omsom, a startup food company, and she just talked a lot about the importance of engaging and being authentic and being always there. Like your brand almost has to be like a person, like a friend to other consumers, and video is an important way they're doing that. They use TikTok a little bit, they use Insta a little bit, but on their website they have like a kind of choose your own adventure style video that I thought is super clever, super fun. It's one of the founders just kind of talking to you about the company and about ways to use the product, and very engaging use of video.
Yeah. So somebody who isn't remotely skeptical about live stream is our friend and partner Deborah and her colleagues at Coresight. So for those of you who are in the session that Deborah led on live stream, incredibly passionate advocate. And here's some of the numbers that the Coresight team have shared looking at the potential in the US. And whilst clearly the growth is predicted to be significantly behind China, where live stream, baked into the super apps, granted, there is a significant growth opportunity. And I think certainly the conversations that I've had, on Monday, first day of the show, coincided with one of our partners, Firework, announcing a significant partnership and a significant deal with one of our other partners, Walmart Connect. And talking to the Firework guys during the show, gosh, it only takes Walmart to get its shoulder behind something, and suddenly more people are interested. So I think there is absolutely scope for this to grow. But as we talked about, I think Krystina, you make a great point about getting out of those walled gardens, put it on the open web, build it into your own website, and test. And just like TikTok, test it in a very rough and ready environment. Don't over polish it, because by the time you over polished it, opportunity's gone.
Yeah, but I do think, kind of that idea about engagement, right? Point 2 of the zeitgeist was such a common theme, and shoppable video live streaming is kind of one piece of that, kind of what we've already talked about around making the in-store experience more fun too, if you can, is another piece of that. But I think there are any number of digital technologies that help with that sort of engagement, right? In addition to live streaming, the session yesterday featured conversational commerce and I'm not going to augmented, virtual, and other sorts of immersive realities.
The metaverse, yeah.
I've been shamed. I'm not going to say it again.
But I think that's a really sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, hey, I'm not shaming you. I think it's so easy to dismiss things. I know we debate the metaverse a lot. I'm not here to say it's going to live in this exact vision that it's described, and it's there's I won't get into the details, but there's a lot of challenges in the true definition of the metaverse ever succeeding. But I think one thing that I would take away, and I think AJ Dalal from Publicis did a really good job of outlining this, is there are so many different ways to play in this space. You don't have to go after everything. You don't have to go after this idealistic version, whether you decide to build your loyalty program on the blockchain, whether you decide to do NFTs that have some value associated with them, so it's not just, oh, look at this cool little virtual good that I have that I can't do anything with. There are opportunities here. So I think you're allowed to talk about the metaverse just in a measured way, but I do think, we didn't hear a lot about it here. I mean, outside of AJ's presentation and Natalie from L'Oreal talking about the work that they did with people of crypto on the main stage, we didn't really hear that word very often here.
It was fairly quiet, I'd agree. I would say in addition to new exciting digital platforms, the other piece of consumer engagement, again, I'm going to harken back to the zeitgeist, is personalization, right? And I think that definitely came up a number of different times throughout the course of the conversations. But so thinking long and hard about how to be as relevant to not just a demographic or a segment, but like the exact customer that's visiting you at any given point is so important.
So let me build on that, Joe. When you talk about personalization, are you talking about product, route to market, communication and marketing? What bit of the grocery journey are we personalizing?
I think the extreme answer is all of the above, but I also think, very few companies have the resources to do all of those things, to execute on all of those things all at once. And so I might almost just start with marketing, because digital marketing is where personalization has sort of been and lived for years now. It's a little harder to do marketing around product or personalization around product maybe, but there are a number of companies that aim to kind of help people build shopping lists based on their dietary needs, preferences, that sort of thing. And that's maybe one example of an opportunity that, again, retailers that are looking to kind of encourage people who haven't tried e-commerce yet for whatever reason to do it, or to do it loyally, to keep coming back. That's one opportunity.
Because marketing personalization, that's pretty much table stakes now, isn't it?
Well, I think even there, people don't leverage the full power of the marketing technologies on the market very often. Some do, but I think it's still easier as marketers, even modern digital marketers, to fall back on, demographics or day part targeting or kind of other more old school approaches to making sure you're reaching the right audience with the right message.
Let's move on then. Starting to bring this all back together. Really interested to hear. I mean, Joe, you've got a real passion about grocery tech, as we all do, but you especially. You have been in the startup pitches. What have you seen? What's interested you? Who won? Why? What are the trends you've seen on grocery tech the last 3 days?
Yeah, so for folks who don't know Startup Pitch and weren't here on Monday, Startup Pitch is our showcase every year at Groceryshop of 12 or so early stage technology solution providers that we think are really doing things that are significantly differentiated that definitely most of our audience won't have heard of yet, but they probably will in the future. The two winners this year, I mentioned one of them, VC Robotics, which is an in-store robot that aims for like after hours shelf restocking, as well as the kind of scanning, finding out of stocks and planogram problems and things like that. The other winner was a company called Y-Waste that helps grocery retailers manage food waste, manage and reduce it. And they there are a number of really great companies focused on sustainability technology right now, but I think what makes Y-Waste stand out and why the judges really liked their story was that they do a bunch of different things that kind of make a lot of sense integrated together. Everything from kind of forecasting expiration of perishable products or even non-perishable products that are just kind of reaching their best by dates, through to dynamic repricing of those products, all the way through to if you really can't sell something at a discount, like what's the most environmentally friendly way to find a home for that, be it donated or otherwise. And I think that idea that they're kind of one solution that can kind of really kind of solve a spectrum of different food waste problems was what made them attractive.
Interesting. Krystina, anything that's jumped out from you? Any trends or vendors that you've surprised or been delighted by?
I would have to defer to Joe on this one. I mean, he's just the expert. I would actually love to have you, not to put you on the spot, I'd love to have you dive a little bit more into some of the other technology companies that we heard from. So basically the way that we format the agenda is we have sort of the startup pitch companies that Joe was just talking about, which are very early stage, but then we also have a track where we feature some of the more established VC-backed companies. And so we had some sessions on, engaging e-commerce experiences, supply chain innovations and things like that. So I would love to hear kind of the standouts for you.
Yeah, I would say, a little bit, it's by design, right? We kind of select the companies, but I would say it was interesting to me how many companies we ended up selecting for Startup Pitch this year that were focused on fulfillment and different ways to get a product from the fulfillment center, the warehouse, the store, into a consumer's hands. Ways all focused on doing it more efficiently, squeezing those kind of pennies of cost out of that. That could be a CPG e-commerce play where instead of shipping a product, you can send somebody to a store to pick it up if it happens to be in stock at that store. Or if somebody makes a grocery e-commerce order, adding a few low-cost impulse purchases to that kind of, if you do the middle mile with enough density and smartly enough, you can make the economics of that work better. So I think fulfillment was definitely something that came up a lot to me. Sustainability we've already talked about. And then I guess, kind of just new ways to do things like product trial and kind of letting people explore, discover products and try them that they haven't before.
How does that work then?
You wanna, so a couple of examples, right? I think, and again, I'm mainly leaning into startup pitch here, with apologies for the more established technology companies, but there's one company or a couple of companies that are focused on kind of helping stores and new brands find one another, and kind of so you can rent some shelf space in a store that has some excess capacity, and so get placement that way, or kind of find clever ways to add kind of trial size packages into an e-com order, and again kind of supplying all of the data back end to make sure that you're understanding who's trying your product, did they like it, and did they become a purchaser after that.
Okay. We've got about 10 minutes to go. I think at this point we'd all like a little bit of feedback. So we've got a bit of an ask the audience. Joe, you're the tech guy. You know Slido. How can we make this work?
Let's go forward a slide. Oh, we're supposed to talk about things that surprised us. We'll do that after.
Integrate it into this.
We'll be surprised if we can make this work.
We have some polling coming up. There's a QR code on the screen. If you scan it with your phone, that should take you straight through to Slido. There shouldn't be a poll going right now, but when you advance the slide, the two things we want to know are, what did you want to learn when you came to Groceryshop? And so you have a list of about 10 different things. The Slido should be live. The QR code will do the same thing, take you to the question. Please pick 3 of those things. We'll give you a little bit of time. Maybe we'll talk about surprises while people are voting.
Fantastic. So Krystina, it's probably not giving the game away that you wrote your Zeitgeist presentation before the show started.
Yeah, that would be tough to pull off the cuff.
So that was our views coming into the show, and it reflected the agenda and the speakers that we invited for 3 days. We've talked about some of the things that are similar. Tell me maybe about some of the differences or some of the things you might not have been expecting.
It's a really good question. I think, it is somewhat validating to see the conversations go in somewhat the direction. Obviously, we engineered a little bit that way because we have topics on the agenda on those specific points. I think one thing that surprised me a little bit, and there's multiple ways you can read into this, there wasn't as much talk about sustainability this year. And I think what I mean by that is, of course, we had sustainability sessions. We heard from PJ, from Hormel on the main stage talking about regenerative. We, of course, heard from Nick Green from Thrive Market, again, sort of talking about how they're removing plastics, making their products more sustainable, how they're working with suppliers as well as on their own private brands to create more sustainable products. But I think in past years, it has felt like people have just kind of tried to shove that word into any conversation where it wasn't necessarily relevant, kind of like Joe using metaverse earlier. Just kidding. But it felt this year, at least to me, like the topics on sustainability were a little bit more authentic, and they were brought up where they were relevant, but not just sort of thrown into any conversation where they could potentially be relevant.
Yeah, I think the industry is really maturing there, right? Either you have a specific story within that broad set of different things you could do around sustainability with some metrics, or you don't talk about it anymore. And I think that's very healthy evolution.
I mean, from my perspective, I was expecting to hear more about smart stores, smart grocery stores. I was expecting to hear more about just walkout technologies, about smart carts, about connected shopping experiences. It's there on the trade floor, but I haven't heard it as much in the content, and that surprised me.
Yeah, I mean, that may be just because, it's interesting that the grocery retailers we've had on our stage haven't talked about it so much. It was definitely a topic of conversation in the technology track, because there's a number of great solution providers doing that. But
we've had much more conversation about top of funnel and interaction and making occasion shoppable away from the grocery store itself rather than technology in the store. But that's
I'd agree.
Fascinating.
So coming into Groceryshop, new grocery technologies were top of mind for a plurality of you in the audience today. Engaging shoppers and future of the store was third. So again, physical stores still definitely matter to our audience. And then convenience brand retailer, inflation, and we can't actually see the things that none of you chose, but as far as like the top 5 or 6 or 7 things, I think hopefully that was well reflected on the agenda. But I think we find out on the next question. You get one more question, which is, now that Groceryshop is ending, which topics were the most interesting or important to you while you were here. It's always interesting to see if the coming in question and the going out question match. But please do vote on that while I ponder what surprised me while we've been here the last several days. I think, maybe kind of the other half of the sustainability conversation for years now has been about purpose and brand purpose. And that was something that, I don't know, I definitely heard it. I think Jason from Whole Foods kind of talked about how important it is to them, and like not what they do sell, but what they don't sell, the kind of ingredients that they won't carry, that sort of thing. I think certainly a number of the younger brands that have been on our stage over the last several days talked about brand purpose as well. But again, I only saw one particular slice of the total agenda, but it kind of surprised me, maybe because it's so internalized at this point. It's not something you have to talk about anymore because it's something everybody is doing. You don't need to kind of beat the drum of our brand purpose is this, because we all kind of know that.
Thank you, Joe. So here's the results. Engaging shoppers, future of tech, future of convenience, and grocery tech. So the grocery tech's up there high, but it's really interesting to see the resonance of future of convenience, and also around how we continue to engage our shoppers.
I'm very surprised to see retail media networks being so low.
Because it was sort of the phrase of the show.
It was, yeah. Very interesting.
Great. We've got 5 minutes left. We promised the opportunity to open up the stage. Just for sake of clarity, if you've got a question, please raise your hand. If you could stand up. There's people with mics walking around.
I think there's a couple of fixed mics, actually. Which we can't see, so you'll have to kind of, we can sort of vaguely see.
The slight challenge we have is the lights mean that we can't see you. So if you have a question, please flag one of our colleagues in the yellow t-shirts, and then if you could just shout, because we can't see you. I think there's a hand over, I can see a hand up right at the far side.
Hi, actually, I apologize if this is too basic, but it's kind of a housekeeping because I was asked this question a few times and I just didn't know the answer. I think you can see usually when a slide goes up, everybody's smartphones go up and they start taking pictures of it, and occasionally a presenter will say, well, this will be available, this deck, but then they're like, well, where's the deck? I've been asked, I'm like, I don't have a clue. Like, is there possibly a database or something maybe we can connect to afterwards to find the decks, or?
I will take that. Easy question.
Okay,
so yes,
awesome.
so essentially before the show starts, when we collect all the presentations from our speakers, we ask them to opt in or out to have their presentation shared after the show. So about 1 to 2 weeks post-show, we will send you all a fabulous recap email with links to our main stage keynote videos and then the presentation decks of anyone who has agreed to have them shared.
So you'll get that in your email.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for asking. We clearly need to communicate that better.
That's great.
First and foremost, thanks. It's been a great show. Ryan from T-Mobile.
Thank you.
If any of you were the CEO of a grocery store today, based off of what you learned this week, what would you immediately walk away with, knowing that you need to put a strategic priority investments around?
Great question. Krystina, do you want to open that one up and I'll follow?
Man, I'm not making enough money to answer this question. I don't know if I'm going to be the CEO. I think, my personal priority would be things that sort of straddle the line of creating efficiencies while also not compromising the experience, or perhaps accomplishing both. So I'm thinking of things like whether it's automation in fulfillment centers so that you're cutting out labor while at the same time delivering a better customer experience by creating that speed. Those would be sort of the opportunities that I would look for, as those technologies that don't just do one thing but have that and factor.
Yeah, I would be thinking about just the ways that I'm communicating with my customers these days. It's funny how so much of the grocery industry still uses old school paper circulars as the way they kind of explain what's on sale and whatnot. And I think most retailers now are shifting that to email, but I think there are other channels that could be really interesting ways to start to personalize those communications. And again, I feel like it's very easy to say, well, that's the big guys can do that, but because smaller smaller regional players can't. But I actually think there are solutions now that actually make those sorts of personalization capabilities scale really, really down a lot. So I'd be thinking a lot about communicating to your customers in that personalized way.
I mean, if I was a CEO, I'm going to start off with the premise that my teams are good at running shops. So we're running shops, we know what we're doing, we're making a bit of margin, but not much. But all the incremental growth opportunities, which there are, but they're hard to get to, are outside of the shop. They're around connected, they're around communication, they're around ecosystems. So I'd be thinking, how do I get my team ready to lean heavily into that? There was a lovely quote yesterday, and I forgive me, I can't remember who it was. Somebody said, there's only 3 ways to win. You've either got to be first, if you're not first, you've got to get really, really smart people into your business, or the third one is you've got to cheat. And I think for a lot of retailers at the moment, if I was CEO, I'd probably be saying on a number of these things, be it retail networks, be it seamless, be it connectivity, we're probably not first. So therefore, recruit really, really smart people, build your data teams, build your data scientists, and make sure that you're as good as that as you are with your in-store operations. That's why that would be my play.
I think that was Jason Goldberg who said that.
Was it?
Hi there, thank you for a fantastic couple of days, by the way. Amy from Woolworths over in Australia. It's actually kind of related to what you've just said. I'm really interested to know, based on everything we've seen, there hasn't been a huge narrative on technology for team. We've been overwhelming them a bit with data, communication probably is an opportunity. Do you think there's a little bit of a gap in terms of technology innovation when it comes to engaging, empowering, task management, etc. for our team in bricks and mortar stores?
It's a really interesting question, and it's something we've been talking about quite a bit for the Shop Talk agenda, because we have...
Yeah, come back next March, where we'll feature a whole session on our technology track, specifically focused on empowering frontline workers with new technologies.
But I think part of what we've debating is how much do we do in this space, because quite frankly, we haven't seen a lot of new technology, so I think to your answer, it exists, but what we've been kind of debating internally is how is this manifesting itself in new ways? So I think, yes, definitely still relevant, but we're looking for new use cases, so I'm sure the pitches will flow in now.
And also, to be fair, like a lot of those clienteling focused technologies, they kind of have a very comfortable home in like apparel and other kind of higher value places. I haven't seen a lot of those sorts of applications. You know, when somebody goes up to a random store employee and says, hey, I'm watching my blood sugar, like what can I buy? Like I haven't seen a solution. There might be folks out there, but I haven't seen one to really address that.
Yeah, it seems more like workforce management, like in this industry.
We're about to go out of time. I think we've got one last question, if that's okay.
Yeah. So my question is kind of more about the state of the future sort of engagement between CPG brands and their customers. So in other categories like, you know, apparel, soft goods, we've seen a shift from department store to branded retail. Do you see any kind of future, and that's less currently prevalent in CPG, do you see that as being a future engagement point for brands as they look to kind of create that more direct consumer relationship as well?
Yeah, great question. D2C is something that we've discussed. The big trend that I've heard over and over again in this conference is D2C is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity to get to know your customers better and to build data. It's not an opportunity to make a lot of money from.
Yeah, and I think, you know, even the younger upstart disruptive brands that were on our stage, folks like Honey Pot and Omsom, they all emphasized how important it was to have retailer partners, to be in retail stores early in their existence. I think it's really challenging to think of, you know, kind of somebody building a store footprint outside of pop-ups, you know, specific to one brand, because that's not really the way most of us shop. But yeah, so I think D2C has an absolutely important role to play, but stores and multi-brand stores are still key to this industry.
Look, thank you for your questions. They're about to kill the lights, turn our mics off, and kick us out. So, thank you, everybody out.
Nope, never mind.
They've already killed the clicker. Look, on behalf of myself, Krystina, Joe, the entire Grocery Shop and Shop Talk teams, thank you for joining us.
See you next year.
I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And